taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedules. We really appreciate it. To get things started, I want to take care of a few housekeeping items. My name is Daniel, and I'm with Pluralsight, by the way. And like I said, let's take care of a few housekeeping items. One of the most common questions we get is this webinar being recorded? And it is. So if you're joining us via Zoom, you will receive an email with a link to this recording, usually in a day or two. We try to get those out pretty quickly. If you're joining us on one of our other social networks, Twitter, YouTube, etc., then right as soon as we're done today, you can rewatch it right there where you originally watched it. So should be pretty straightforward there. Another piece of housekeeping, if you're joining us on any platform, wherever you are, and you start to have issues with audio or video or anything, usually refreshing your browser window, or if you're on Zoom, jump out of the meeting real quick, jump back in. Usually that resolves most issues with audio or anything like that. If you continue to have any issues, please definitely let us know, and we'll look into them and help you troubleshoot those. And then one other really important piece of housekeeping is that John is going to be answering your questions at the end of his presentation today. So as those come to mind, I'd really encourage you not to wait until like the end of the presentation to ask those. It's a lot more advantageous for you to get kind of in that question queue right as those questions come to your mind, and then you can be one of the first questions we get to, rather than maybe not having enough time to get to your questions. So hopefully all of that makes sense. Like I said, if you have any other concerns or issues while you're watching today's webinar, just let us know and we'll help troubleshoot them. And I think at this point, we wanted to do a poll to kind of kick things off. Today's webinar is all about Svelte, as you know. And so I'm going to launch this poll. This is for Zoom participants specifically. And it's just really trying to gauge what you're already familiar with. And so the options that we have for you: React, Vue, Angular, another web framework, or vanilla JavaScript. And I'm launching that right now for Zoom participants. You can select multiple options here. So seeing people are already starting to answer those. John, do you see those results, or do I need to speak to those for you?
I see the questions.
Okay.
I don't see the results.
I think once we end the poll, you should see them, but if not, I can speak to the answers, the results, just to make sure. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of votes come in already. I'll give it maybe another couple seconds. I think we probably at least have enough for you to go off of. I appreciate everyone that's joining and participating here. All right, I'm going to end the poll in about 3, 2, 1. Okay, ending the poll right now. Not sure if you can see those, John, but basically you have React is at 46% of the people that are with us right now. Angular is at 51%. Vue is at 25%. Another web framework is at 34%. And vanilla JavaScript is at 49%. So you got React and Angular are kind of the two leaders. Vue and another web framework there, and vanilla JavaScript at 50%. Hopefully that's helpful in kind of guiding the presentation today.
That is good. That's super helpful, because and that's pretty much what we see out there. A lot of people use Angular and React. Vue and other things are extremely popular as well. And then there's a whole bunch of people who also just don't use web frameworks for certain tasks. You might use React normally, but you add a little bit of JavaScript and vanilla JavaScript when you need to. So that's good to know. You're in the right place, basically.
Yeah, and I'm going to disappear in a second, but I did want to speak to, I saw a comment. He said, this doesn't add up to 100%. And it's because we actually allowed people to select multiple. We figured that people might have familiarity with, multiple of these options. So that hopefully explains that. And with that, John, I'll officially kind of turn the time over to you to take it from here.
Perfect. And I'm going to try to share my screen and see what happens here. And quick, Daniel, can you just confirm you can see my screen before I begin?
I can, looking good.
Fantastic. And to give you all a warm welcome here in warm, bright orange, this is our intro to Svelte, tightening your belt with Svelte conversation today. And you're going to hear some background noise. And I hope that 2020 has been kind to you. For me, there's a lot of home repairs going on. So if you hear some banging, just know that it's it's all okay. So today, my name is John Papa, and that's what I go by on Twitter, John_Papa. If you have questions today or afterwards, please feel free to shoot me a question up on Twitter at John_Papa. Now, when we get into talking about Svelte, like what is this? It's another web framework. And I'm using these words specifically to describe Svelte because it's not a JavaScript framework. It's not a JavaScript library. It's not a HTML library. It's a web framework. It's something you use to build web applications and includes all the pieces of the web, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I like to call these kind of tools like React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, web frameworks. And the key differentiators for Svelte, and this is off their website, and I fully believe in these too, is you write less code, which for me is great. I love writing less code. The less code I have to write to get the same functionality is amazing. And I think you'll see this today. You also have no virtual DOM. It takes a different approach in Svelte than it does in some of the other web frameworks because they don't use a virtual DOM. Instead, they write out code at compile time that will manipulate, they say surgically manipulate, the elements in the browser as needed. And third, it's truly reactive. So they use the reactive form to actually update the data fields on the screen as we go. So reactive is something you're probably very familiar with if you use things like Vue 3 or React. Svelte follows the same pattern. Something that's really important about Svelte is it's borrowed from other technologies that it liked different pieces of, and then it made its own things as well. So what's really cool about modern web frameworks is they're all looking at each other to help improve the whole game. A competitive landscape is a really good thing for all of us. We are the beneficiaries. So in this case, you'll see some things as you go out through today. As I code the live demo, which we hope all works perfectly, but maybe we'll get a little debugging as we go. As we build this live demo, you're going to see particular coding styles and syntax that might be familiar to you from React, Angular, Vue, etc. One thing that's really important that really sets Svelte apart is that with Svelte, it builds your app in a compile step. And then it sends mostly vanilla JavaScript, HTML, CSS to the browser. What's this mean and how's it different from other web frameworks? Well, when you're using other web frameworks, there's a lot of React and Vue and Angular that gets sent to the browser too. With Svelte, it basically builds a lot of that stuff right on the server or your build step, and it emits a JavaScript file, or more than one if you need, up to the browser. And what's in that JavaScript file is a lot of DOM manipulation and JavaScript logic, but there's not a whole lot of Svelte in it. So for example, when you ship an Angular app, there's an Angular runtime that gets shipped to the browser. And then there's also your specific app-specific code. With Svelte, that combination is not as top-heavy of the framework's architecture. It's mostly your app-specific code and a tiny sprinkle of Svelte going to the browser. For example, in one of the demos I'm going to show you today, the entire demo shipped to the browser is about 3K. That's correct. It's 3 kilobytes, including the app and Svelte all in one file. And that's a hello world type app. Now, I'd like to show the resources before and after, and Daniel has promised from Pluralsight they'll send these out as well in their follow-ups, but these are all the links that you're going to need and that you'll see today. First, the Svelte documentation. We'll look at that. I'm going to use VS Code. You can get that here from this link. It's free. And if you use VS Code, there are some Svelte extensions that you can get from this link that really light up Svelte inside of code. The demo that we're going to see at the end, it's a fully built app. You can see it from this link at Shop at Home. It's a demo that uses a lot of features of Svelte, and you can see the running demo, and you can see the full source code inside of GitHub. And we're going to see Svelte running up in the cloud on Azure. So here's a link where you can actually walk through a tutorial that deploys the Svelte app up to the cloud for you. And if you'd like a free Azure trial, because who doesn't want a free trial, you can click on this link right here. So with that, before we get started, these are the steps to start using Svelte. First, we're going to run a command called npx dgit, and then we're going to grab this repo that the Svelte team has put together called svelte.js/template. And what it does is it pulls it out of Git, and it's going to create it on our local hard drive in a folder called Hello World. Now, you might think, how's it different from cloning? When you clone a repo, you're getting all the Git history. What this does is it takes Git out of the haul mechanism. So you're just getting a folder with the files. That's why it's called dgit. So we're going to dgit it to our local folder, and then we're going to go into that folder, and we're going to npm install to install the dependencies, and then we're going to serve it. And that's going to be our Hello World application. And from there, we're going to start adding some features. So what are we going to build today? Anybody who knows me knows I love talking about heroes and villains. So I'm going to build a little heroes app. Not a whole lot of CSS because we're doing this live, but we'll build a heroes app so you can see a list of heroes on the screen, and we'll exercise all the fundamentals of Svelte as we go through this. And at the end, I'll give you links to the code again for the full app, and then also some tips on some other things you can do with Svelte and next steps. So with that, I think it is time to flip over to our hands-on demo. All right, so up on the screen, you should see two things. On the left, I've got VS Code. On the right, I've got these Svelte docs. That's what you can find at svelte.dev. That's the website. Now, the first thing it's telling me, I'll zoom in a little on the right. It's telling me to get started, I type this dgit command right here. But I'm only going to copy the first part because I don't want to call it my Svelte project. I'm going into a folder on the left called play, and I'm going to type in Hello World. Let's hope I don't have another app called that. Boom. Now I'm going to cd into Hello World. And then I'm going to run a quick command that just reloads code on the same window. So now it's looking at the folders and files that we have. So now here's our application. I'm going to open back up the terminal down below, run npm install. And it's going to install all my dependencies. What are those? If you go to the package JSON, you can see there's a couple dependencies in the app for development. In development, there's all this rollup stuff. Rollup, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually written by the same gentleman who created Svelte, Rich Harris. Rollup is a great tool that bundles your application. And then, of course, Svelte is in here. So once we get all of that, we've got to run the command to start it, which is called dev right there on line 6. So we're going to run npm run dev. And these are all the steps that are over here on the right-hand side. Now, if I make sure that I don't have any other servers running, that would be a good thing to do. I did actually, so let's kill that. Do it again. And notice the port was funny. Cool. It should run on port 5000 by default. I had something running on 5000, so I killed that. Now I'm going to click on that, and there's our Hello World application. So let's take a quick look at what it did for us in the first place. The Svelte application has two files. That's it. There's a main.js, that's the entry point. And you can see right here on the left what's happening. I've got this app called app. It's targeting the body of the application. And props, that's the first thing we're seeing that's Svelte-ish here. Props are properties that I'm passing in from main to my application, my app component. Svelte is a component-based web framework. And we're passing in a prop called name with the value of world. And if I change world to John, and then I save it, you'll notice on the right, we see John. So what's happening here is inside of main, I'm passing in this prop to app, and then I go to the app Svelte, and up top, you can see on line 2, there's an export let name. Name is the property, and because I'm exporting this, what that does is it makes the name variable available to be able to be seen outside of this component. So up inside of main, I can pass in name for John, and then the app gets that right here. So where is name used? Well, down inside my code, you can see on line 6, name is being displayed on the screen as hello name. Now, the first bit of real Svelte template syntax you're seeing is that you've got these curly braces. If you're used to React or Angular, these other technologies, you'll be familiar with this. This is interpolation. Effectively, whatever the variable is there, it's going to display the value on the screen. That's how that works. It's read only, and it can, as it gets updated in the code, if I change this to world again, you'll see that it gets passed in as world. We'll go back to John. Now, the structure of a component is interesting as well. Notice we've got our code up top. That's the script. So I've got a script tag. This is where I put my JavaScript. Svelte also supports TypeScript as well. So I can support my JavaScript there. Notice my HTML is just on the page. Anything I put here works. For example, let's say I deleted the main and instead I put it in an H1 tag and said, hi there. Now I just have a component that says hi there. So I can put anything I want here. And I could put in a second one there that says goodbye too. So therefore, any HTML on this page here on the left ends up being rendered on the right. Let's go ahead and put back our code. And you'll also notice there's a style here. So styles and scripts get put inside of style and script tags, which is basic HTML, right? And then we've got our HTML page right down there. And the only thing on this page that's really Svelte-ish is the name variable getting interpolated. So let's take this to the next step. Now I want to create a heroes component that will show a list of heroes. And I want to create a hero component to show the hero's details. Let's start with the hero details. And to kind of give this a little bit of teeth, let's first create a variable. We'll create the variable called hero. And let's create a hero object. So first we'll create this object where we've got a name, and our hero is going to be Daniel because he was so kind enough to join us today. Now he's regretting that. And the birth year of Daniel is going to be, let's say, 1910. Why not, Daniel? You're looking really good for your age. So this is our hero object. Now I want to be able to pass this in from my app to a hero component. So I'm going to go up into the source, choose a new file, and I'm going to type in hero detail svelte. And there's my component. Now I'm using one of the extensions I talked about in VS Code for creating Svelte snippets. If I type in s-component format, you'll see it basically gives me the markup and the style and the script template. So I don't have any script or style yet, but my markup is where I'm going to put the details. Now let me start this off by grabbing a little bit of HTML because you don't want to watch me do this, believe me. Let's see here. We're going to create a div down here. That's not a div. And inside there, I want to show the hero's name and then the birth year for that particular hero. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a div with a label right here. And I'm going to call this one name, and then I'm going to have my closing div like that. And inside of this one, we want to make sure we can display the value. So let's use an input for it. We'll go ahead and have an input here. We'll make it of type text. And then for this particular one, we'll go ahead and tell it it's got a name of name because that's what the label is matching against. And that's a normal input that we might have. So in that input, I want to be able to display this. Now, before we bind anything to it, let's go back into the script and we have to tell it we're going to need a hero object. So we're going to say export let hero. And by default, the hero has nothing yet. There is no property. We want to get this from app. So up on app, we defined a hero here, and I want to pass it in to the bottom. So here I want to type in hero detail like that, and it doesn't know what it is yet. So I have to go up to the top and notice that it automatically imported hero detail svelte. That's a feature of VS Code. And if you're watching over on the right-hand side, you can see the name now appears as an input box, which is cool, but it's not passing in my hero. So notice in hero detail, I've got this hero variable, and I want to use it here for this name. Normally, I would put it in the value inside of an input like this. So how do I get the value to get that value in there? Well, you might think I just do something like hero.name, and you'd be close. What I really want to do is use those interpolations like that. That's basically dereferencing the binding. And because this is two-way binding, not just rendering it, I need to bind : to the value, this hero.name. So that's going to say, once you get the hero on line 2 that's passed in through props, go ahead and bind it automatically to the input. And then up inside the app, I have to pass the hero in. So here I could say hero equals hero, or herp, there we go, like that. And you notice as soon as I saved, it actually changed what I typed from this. Now watch this on the left as I save it, to that. That's because there's a shortcut syntax. Because the property, which is on the left, was named the same as the variable on line 6, it automatically gave a shorthand syntax. This is kind of like the object literal shorthand syntax. So hero here in yellow on line 35 is the hero inside of hero detail. And the one on the right is the one that I'm passing in. If I called this hero with 3 O's like that, now I can do this. And notice when I save it, it does not shorten the syntax. So it's kind of a neat feature. It lets you type less. So hero detail, I'm passing in a hero. It comes into the hero over here, and then voila, we've got Daniel right inside of our input box. Let's go ahead and duplicate that, and we'll add in our birth year. We'll go ahead and do a little bit of typing here. It's birth year, and then down here, it's going to be matching this one. It's going to be hero birth _ year. Now we can see both got passed in and everything's good. So at this point, we've seen a couple different features. We've seen how to create new components, how to import them. So in the app, we can see we're importing the hero detail right below the main. We can put it inside the main too, and it should gain any of the styling that we had, as we can see right there. We're passing in a prop and binding to that prop. Now notice what happens if I get rid of export on line 2 of the hero detail. This code is still valid, but it can no longer punch through. The app Svelte can't punch through into hero detail to pass it the hero because I didn't export. This basically is a way of saying make it public, make it available so other people can pass the value in, which is super important with my props. So at this point, we've got our hero, but maybe we want to make it so we can have a list of heroes and then select the hero and show them on the page. So let's do a little bit of surgery on our code and get it to that point that we want to do that. The next thing we're going to do is create a heroes list component. So let's go back up here, create a new file, and call it heroes list Svelte. We'll use that component again for the snippet. I'll get rid of all that. So here's our basic component we're going to use. And what we want to put inside this one's a little bit of HTML to make sure we can display our list. Now I'm going to have a little bit of CSS I'm going to copy because again, you don't want to see me type all that. Boom. So there's our CSS. And I'm going to collapse this region so you don't have to look at it right now. You can put these in any order, by the way. I'm going to put my HTML below the script so we can see what's going on. And just to make sure this thing works, let's go ahead and stick an H1 at the top of the page, and we'll put heroes list right there. Now let's go make sure we can render this from our app. So down here, right above the hero detail, I'm going to put in heroes list like that. And I'm going to comment out the hero detail. And then up here, I'm going to go ahead and manually type in heroes list from, and I'm going to put in heroes list Svelte like that. And now on the right-hand side, we can see it's building as it goes, and it sees there's my heroes list in my Svelte right there. So I've got my code working. Next thing we need is we need a list of heroes to actually pass in. So I think the next thing we need to do is go create our list of heroes. Let's go do that by going back to app Svelte. And here, notice we hard-coded a hero. Instead of hard-coding a hero, we'll comment that one out. Let's create a list of heroes here as an array. And again, because you don't want to watch me type this, I am going to copy in a little bit of code. And we'll just paste it over it. And I've got 3 heroes, John, Colleen, and Oliver. And we're all born in the same year. And we can actually get rid of the IDs because I don't think we're actually going to use those. So I'm going to use a little bit of VS Code magic, the multi-cursor, like that. All right. So now we've got our 3 heroes. We want to pass these into the heroes list, which means my heroes list needs to export a list of heroes like this. So export let heroes. And by default, we can give it an empty array, or we could just say, don't do anything there. So how do we get it into that list? Down in heroes list, I know now that the heroes list component has a heroes prop, and I want to set it equal to heroes. That's the hard-coded value that I have up on line 9. And when I save again, it'll do the shortcut syntax. So now my heroes are getting passed in, but I'm not actually doing anything with those. So you might have guessed, next step is to actually display those heroes. So we're going to use a new syntax we haven't seen yet. This is called an each. Now, if I open up this each block right here, this is a snippet, it's going to give me a little hint on how to do it. When you use these things called directives, they start with the hash or the pound symbol on line 29. So you see hash each. And what we're going to do is say, for every hero, for each hero, there's a variable that's going to be represented for the iterator called hero. And then we're going to put our content that we want to repeat inside of here. Now, first, I want to create a UL to wrap everything. And then inside of here, I want to create an LI because I want to repeat everything that's inside of my LI. Now I've got a little bit of class syntax here just to style it. There's a class called row that'll style my row. And then I want to display the value that's inside of here. So what does a hero have? The hero has a name. So we're going to do hero.name, just like that. Notice the names are showing up on the right-hand side. Now, if I want to show other information, I could put something else in there too. So right now we're seeing that we can pass in the heroes, iterate through those, and then display them on the screen. And it's got just a little bit of styling on there. And as you can see, we've got a pointer because we're going to make these clickable relatively soon. So what have we done here? We've created an array. We passed the array in, and then we're displaying it. Well, the next thing we might want to do is when you select one of these, turn it yellow so you see which one you selected, and then possibly remember that so we can display the hero right below here. Let's work on this. How can we make it so we select John or Colleen or Oliver? Well, the next step is to add a little bit of CSS, which we've done for selected. Notice I've got selected CSS here, turns the background yellow. So I want to use that class and apply it whenever somebody clicks on the row. So now we're going to use a binding for events on the LI. So in the LI, we're going to say on, : this is how we apply an event. Then I'm getting IntelliSense on what event do I want. When you click, we want to go ahead and bind to something. Now again, because we're binding, we're using these squiggly brackets. And we're going to call a function, which then does this code. Selected hero equals hero. Now notice it's telling me there is no such thing as selected hero yet. But I want to set the hero on this row to a selected hero variable. So I'm going to come up here and type in let selected hero. And that's now a local variable that I can use inside my template. Great, so now I can select the hero. How do I actually turn that row to be yellow? Well, the next thing I want to do is I want to set up and use a class binding. So I do class : and I want to set the class called selected. That's my CSS class name. And then again, there's a binding here. Whenever the selected hero exists and it equals the hero, we're going to go ahead and we're going to set that class to true. So let's try this. Over on the right, let's select Colleen. Now it's yellow, Oliver, John, Colleen. So we've just seen how we can use a class binding and a click binding on the same row. So we've got 3 different kinds of bindings here. We're using interpolation to display the hero. We're using a class binding to change the class that's associated with it for CSS. And then we have a click binding to manipulate code as we need. Now, once we have that, maybe what we want to do is add in some conditional logic to show the selected hero. So I'm going to show an if block at the bottom. Just like we had an each block, we have an if directive. And this condition is going to be, okay, if there's a selected hero, I want you to show the logic that's right here. So for now, I'm just going to type in the text, someone is selected. So when I click on Colleen, you can see someone is selected. But how do we know who is selected? Well, that's where we put a little bit of HTML here. We'll come back down. And in this case, let's go ahead and we'll put in, luckily we have a hero detail component already. And we can pass in the hero is going to be equal to the selected hero. And notice the shortcut syntax doesn't happen this time because the variable locally is selected hero. The property is hero. So we're going to pass that in. Now when I click on Oliver, Colleen, John, you can see the values are displayed below. So we're taking advantage of all of our different features right now by putting them all in here. All right, so the next step might be, okay, how do I make it so that I get my data from another source, like over HTTP? Let's add that in, and we'll actually use some Star Wars API to do that. Because, hey, anybody who knows me knows I love some Star Wars. So on this heroes list page, we're going to create a function. It's going to be asynchronous because we want to go get data over HTTP, and we'll call it get people. And inside this code, we're going to create a constant called response. It can be called anything we want. And we're going to use the fetch API, which is built into the browser. You could also use Axios if you want to. And we're going to call an API called swappy dash, it's actually dev, it's been renamed. Any of you who've used it before, to fetch the people. So that's going to make our asynchronous call, gives back a response. From there, we have to pull the JSON out of the results. That's asynchronous as well. We'll take this response JSON, and then we're going to return JSON.results. That's a variable. Make sure I don't have any syntax changes. So now I've got this function that goes and gets the people. They happen to also have a name and a birth year property, so that'll work just fine for us. Now to get this, what we could do is we could set a, to be very pedantic, a variable called heroes promise right up top, and we're going to call get people as soon as the page is loaded here. That's going to get my heroes promise. But how does that promise end up becoming the heroes down on line 41? This is kind of cool. Svelte has this neat feature called an await directive. So what we can do is we want to basically await the answer to this JSON response and then display the heroes. And then while we're waiting for it, we're going to display a message like loading for the users. So let's go and use the syntax here for the await. And there's a couple of these that are available. We'll do them with a catch. Notice it's telling me put the promise right here. So it's going to await the hero's promise. And then the value is going to be, what do I get once this works? I want to store the value's results from the promise when I unwrap it in a heroes variable. That way it's named exactly the same as what I want in my each row in line 48. And then I have a hero's error condition. So what do I want to display when it's pending? Well, because we're doing Star Wars, we're going to say the heroes are in a galaxy far, far away. And then when we get those heroes back, what do we display? Well, let's go grab our UL right here, and we'll paste it right up top. And if there's an error, what do we want to put in this case? Let's go ahead and grab a little code here just to show you what that would look like. You can put anything you want. The Sith has wiped out the heroes, and notice I'm putting an error message there. I'm binding the result of the catch's error to show the error right below. And on the right, if you've been watching here, you'll see the heroes list has appeared. Now, if I refresh the right, you'll see a momentary glimpse of it showing heroes are in a galaxy far, far away. That's because while it makes the HTTP call, the heroes are not yet here yet, and the promise is not responded. So therefore, it's displaying what's in the await. And then it automatically unwraps it, puts it in the heroes variable on line 42, and then it puts it inside my each right here. Now, really, I should stop passing in the heroes on line 4 because it's not being used anymore. And back in my app, I should no longer be passing the heroes in here. Let's go ahead and just comment that out. Because even though I'm passing them in, it wasn't being used. So now what I've got is my promise comes here, and I get my await, so I can pass in my heroes. And when I choose somebody like Obi-Wan Kenobi, you can see Obi-Wan's down there, Darth Vader, C-3PO. Daniel is no longer a Star Wars hero. Sorry about that, Daniel. So at this point, we've got our for loop, we've got our HTTP, we've got an await. There's one last thing we want to take a look at. What if we wanted in our application to raise an event? Why is that important? Notice what happens when I change C-3PO's name to C-3PO Daniel. like that. Nothing. It's not changing it up here. Well, you might say, what if I had a save button? Okay, so that's a good thing to think about. Let's go to the hero and let's add a button right there. And we'll put the word save on it. How do we actually make the save button do something? So when I'm over here, we click the save, it saves R2D2 and it updates it in the top list. That's really what we want to get to. So you might think, okay, I need an event like on click, and I need to call something. Well, let's say I've got a function called save hero locally here, and I'll put the binding around it. It doesn't exist yet. So up top, I'm going to create a function called save hero. And then I need to do something to save the hero. Well, maybe I don't want to do anything inside the detail, but I want to pass this back up to my heroes list. Let the heroes list actually do the saving part. To do that, I need to raise an event. To raise an event, I need to import something called the create event dispatcher. So I'm going to import from Svelte like this. And then over here, I'm going to pull in something called the create event dispatcher. What this does, it gives me a way to get a dispatcher to dispatch events. Dispatching events basically means to send them off. So I've got my dispatcher up here. Now I need to go create the dispatch function. It's just a little shorthand. So I'll create a function called dispatch, which is the result of calling create dispatcher. Now I can dispatch any events I want. So I type in dispatch, name my event. In this case, I'm going to call it save hero. And then I'm going to pass as the payload, the hero. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening here. We'll use a little debugging. When I click on Obi-Wan, and let's say I change Obi-Wan to Ben, and I press save, I want to know that I'm emitting out the message of save. So I'm going to open up the developer tools inside the browser. We'll make this a little bit bigger. Boom, boom, boom. We'll go to our sources tab, and we're going to open up the heroes detail. I think it's hero detail. There we go. And then over here, I want to basically break on line 8. So when I select Luke Skywalker, and I change Luke to Joe, and I press save, notice a breakpoint hits here, and I've got my hero there, which is now going to have Joe as the name and all the other properties that were passed in on the hero. Great. So we have a way of getting to our, our hero. Put that back on the right. Now we need to listen for it on the heroes list. So heroes list component talks to the hero detail down at the bottom. It needs to listen for an event we called save hero. So we have to use our on once again to say that we've got an on down here. So we got on, and notice automatically we've got this save hero, which appears in the IntelliSense. Now at this point, I want to call a function locally inside my code. So we can call this whatever we want. Just to be different, I'm going to call it save, which means I need a function called save up here. We'll call that save there. Now, what does save get? Save gets the value of the payload that we passed in, plus a few other things. So what we're going to do is use destructuring here. We only want a property on the payload that's called detail. And that's going to be hero to save. I'm going to rename that the hero to save. And for now, we're going to just console.table to show what we got, our hero to save. So you want to see in the console what's going to happen. That way I don't have to set a breakpoint. You can actually just see it down below inside the bottom right. So now if I choose C3PO, and I change C3PO to a gold dude, press save, we should be able to see, if I can see the whole console table. I'll just scroll this up. There's my name. Right there is gold do. Let's see if I can get the full word. There you go. Gold dude, plus all the other properties that were there in my console table. It didn't update it yet in this list because I don't have write permissions to the swappy.dev. As you might have guessed, I didn't write it. One last thing to show. Notice we had an error condition for the await, where it says the Sith has been wiped out. If I change swappy.dev to swappy.co, which I did actually this morning because I've forgotten that the API was renamed, it actually shows an error. And instead of showing this ugly error over here, it's showing the error to the user that I told it to. It says, oh, the Sith have been wiped out, or Sith have wiped out the heroes, and then we failed to fetch is actually the error message that came back. So by using that await syntax, we can actually show errors, a loading message, and then the actual results of our application. So we looked at quite a bit in the app. Let's take a step back before we go to questions here. In the application, we started out by showing how we can render field values with the interpolation here on line 39. We showed how we can pass in props between components, which is very familiar to you in React and Vue with props, and with Angular with inputs. We also showed how we can use outputs from Angular, or just props again, to raise and dispatch events, like we do right here with the save hero, and then listen to those events inside of our components. We also saw a lot of cool things with Svelte that I really like is there's just less things to write. We don't have render functions. We don't have a template section. We don't have a lot of the boilerplate that a lot of the other frameworks have, because Svelte just assumes if you put HTML on this page, that's the HTML you want. And it uses the basic things in JavaScript and HTML in the browser to say, look, there's a style tag and there's a script tag. That's where your code and your styles are going to go. So there's quite a bit that comes out of the box with Svelte. And you can see that I can do a lot. And I still only pulled in the Svelte package. I didn't have to pull in other packages and other things. And I get quite a bit of functionality out of the box. But if you want to see a little more robust example, something we can't do in 40 minutes like this, there's a website, and you got this link in the end I'll show again. But if you'd like to look at it now, it's shopathome.dev. That's shopathome.dev. There's a Svelte application up here, which is using other features. And this is up on Azure with SSL and a custom domain. And from here, if you log in with your Twitter authentication, just click on Twitter, if you have Twitter. If you don't, you can use GitHub on there. And then it logged in, it shows you the authentication. Then I can click on my list. It's using routing with Svelte, with a routing package. It goes off and gets my list of shopping items. I can also add items if I wanted to. There's also a list of discounts, which only work if you're in GitHub. So I can log out. I can show GitHub login. There we go. Now my discounts work, my list. But this one is actually using some features called the Svelte store. So it's kind of like Redux or NGRX or Vuex for the other technologies. It's also using the Svelte router. And it's got a little more HTML and CSS going on to make things style a little bit better, and some icons from Font Awesome. But you can check this one out by going to shopathome.dev, and the full source code is up here on GitHub by clicking that link. And you can see the full repo. Plus, there's an Angular, React, Svelte, and a Vue version of the same exact app if you want to compare them side by side. You can also deploy it to Azure from clicking on this blue button right here, just like I showed you just a moment ago. Other things to look at we mentioned are the Svelte homepage. I really like to show you one thing in here. There's a tutorial. If you click on the tutorial in the upper right, you can go step by step through this. And what's cool is it'll show you something like this in the right where it says hello world. And it says, okay, we want to show the name instead, not just hello world. And it says basically you want to replace world with a variable called name. Well, great. That means I'm going to have to add a script tag in here, right? So you can just use this REPL to automatically define your properties that you need. So there's name. Now it says hello name. And if you don't know what you're doing, or you're kind of learning, or there's a step you don't understand, you can click on show me and it will show you the code and the answer. You can reset that or show. And you can click on the next arrow to go to the next tutorial. This REPL is really, really good. And there's a ton of steps in here where you can learn a whole bunch of things about using Svelte in here, including the class directive, which we saw earlier. And there's the show me example. So you can see the class directive showing how you can select a value, and the await syntax that I showed. So I'm really excited about how they set up the REPL right inside of here. And the final link, and this is also on the slides, is a tutorial which takes about 18 minutes where you can publish an Angular, React, Svelte, or a Vue app, in this case, Svelte, to Azure Static Web Apps by following this step-by-step tutorial up on Azure. You don't need an Azure account to do this. It automatically sets it up for you. It's like a sandbox, so you can try it without ever worrying about using your own accounts, no credit card or anything needed. You just walk through this, takes about 18 minutes or less, and you can deploy a Svelte app. It's actually a variation of the Shop at Home app right here up onto Azure. So it gives you an idea how you can deploy these apps too. With that, I think it's time for us to get to some questions, Daniel. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. So much great stuff so far. You should be able to open up the Q&A box, John, and I see several really good questions. Not sure we're going to have time to get to every single one of them, but are you able to kind of see that list there?
I am, and I'm going to take a quick drink so I can not choke.
I think you've earned that. I think that's fine.
Thank you. All right, so first question I see is from Jake Brandt. Thanks for the questions, Jake. Can I split my JS from my HTML, CSS? Might be covered later. I think you might mean, I'm going to take a little liberty here. If you mean in the same file, yes, you can have those in 3 different places in the same file. If you want to put them in separate files, not by default. Are there creative ways you could import your JavaScript from another file? Yeah, absolutely. But in Svelte, it's about having less things, all your code for that component's in one place. If you might be wondering, do components get big? Only if you put too much stuff in the same component. And I'm a victim of this times myself. So to answer your question literally, no, not really. They all go in the same file. The key tip I have is that if your components start looking like they're getting too big, and usually you can see this from the code or the HTML, it might be time to split out different pieces of that component into other components, which also makes them easier to maintain, reuse, and test. Another question from Pieter. Thank you for the question, Pieter. What if 2 components export variables using the same name? Can you alias them in the component that imports them? You know, I don't know the answer to that. I've always been careful to make sure I don't do that, but I could see it happening. And you know what? If you hit me up on Twitter after this, Pieter, I will check this out and I will answer it for you because it would be pretty easy to look this up. So good. I'm glad we got a question I didn't know the answer to right away. Renee, thanks for the question, Renee. Could I actually say const heroes equals await get people in the script tag? Yes, that's a great question. And we didn't have time to show all the ways we can do stuff, but let's say we didn't want to use the await directive. Instead, we could just make our asynchronous call to go get our people, store the value in heroes using the await async await syntax, and then use those heroes just like a regular variable inside of our template. The await directive is just a little more robust. But if you want to use the variable and the async await syntax directly, absolutely you can do that. And I've done it myself. And actually, you'll see that in the Shop at Home example. And my house is getting repairs, you might be able to hear. So Chris, thanks for your question. What's your thoughts about using Svelte with Sapper? So I like Sapper. For those of you who aren't familiar, Sapper is to Svelte as Nuxt is to Vue or Next is to React, basically. So Sapper is really cool. There was recently an announcement by Rich Harris, I think it was 2 weeks ago, who's the creator of Svelte, where he hinted that Sapper itself might end up going away, but that functionality would go into Svelte. None of this was hardcore yet. I encourage you to go check out Rich Harris's most recent video at the Svelte Society conference. The video's up on the web. I'll try to find that link and put it on Twitter as well. But Sapper is very cool. It gives you server-side rendering of your Svelte objects. Thank you for the question, Brant. Are component styles encapsulated, shadow DOM'd, emulated like Angular? The styles that you put inside your components are only scoped to the component that they're in. Yes. Jake has another question. How does Svelte work alongside SEO concerns? Where would it stand against something like Angular pre-rendering? Great question. Svelte with SEO, if I wanted to go that route, I would probably use Sapper with Svelte. So I can get that pre-rendering that you need, so SEO would work for public sites. Cody's asking, is CSS scope to the component? Yes, we just answered that one. Thanks, Cody, for asking. Wilson, thanks for your question. Thanks, John. You've been my mentor. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Question about the routers, guards, and interceptors. Okay, so is there a router, guard, and interceptors? Yes, there are other features that you can use with the router. There is no official router with Svelte. I happen to use one. I'd have to look up the name. I think it's by Emil Tholian. I have to go look it up. Might have the name wrong. It's called the Svelte router that I really like. are the guards and interceptors. Those features are in things like Axios that I use. So when I want to use HTTP, Fetch is cool, but I like Axios because it's an amazing HTTP library, and it's got things like guards and interceptors that you can pull in from its ecosystem. So I like to use Axios for that with Svelte. Andrew, thanks for your question. Do you have experience with large-scale Svelte apps and trade-offs with large vendor bundles like React? I have not built a large-scale app with Svelte yet, meaning like a web page for Walmart, Target, Disney, etc., or some massive enterprise app. I have with some of these other technologies. So that would be something I couldn't speak to directly. But would I be scared off from using Svelte in a large app, given what I've seen? No, I wouldn't. There's a couple caveats that I have. One is I would, at this point, really be interested in seeing what Rich Harris is going to do with Sapper. And he's also talking about a new thing called Snowpack, which will give you hot module replacement with Svelte as you build it. So he's got some really cool things coming. And these are less about the features than they are about the ecosystem kind of firming up around Svelte. And the bundle stuff too. So Svelte is interesting because when you've got Svelte, your bundle sizes for your code get smaller. Third-party stuff, not so much, but it does use Rollup, which Rollup is a great bundler. Or you could use Webpack as well if you wanted to. So you can still use Webpack, which will give you the same footing as something like React. Andrew, thanks for the question. Do I have experience with large scale? Yes, sorry, that was your same one. Wilson, do we have materials, components, or something like that? If there's anything like Angular material for Svelte, I'm not familiar with it directly. I don't use those a lot, but what I did use in this particular app that we showed at Shop at Home is I used Bulma, which is a library you can use. I've used Tailwind with it as well. So there's definitely a bunch of UI and CSS frameworks that you can use with it. Christopher is asking, do I see cons of using Svelte compared to other frameworks? I'd say the biggest con is that con meaning not a pro, not a con like a cheat, is that Svelte is newer than the others by a couple of years, and the ecosystem isn't as firm yet. Meaning what? It means that if you go look for the default router, you're not going to find one. You're going to find several. If you're going to go look for a CLI, you're not going to find one yet because they may or may not create one, but you may not even need one because it's simpler to use. So the ecosystem, while it's very vast with Svelte, I would say it's not on par with how firm and standardized things like Angular are with your ecosystem. So that'd be my biggest concern at this point. Not a concern so much as it is it's something to be aware of. Can you use Svelte without rollup? From Patrick. Great question, Patrick. Yes, you can. You can actually use Webpack with it if you'd like to. There are some samples up on the Svelte site to show how to do that. Steve Holland, thanks for the question, is asking, is there a way to dump out the object like you can in NG, like a pre with JSON? Yes, you can. You can basically just dump the object out with JSON and then put it inside a pre tag if you want to see what the results of that would look like. And let's see, last question here is, how do you update heroes on the list? That very question is what I had trouble with in React and Vanilla, would sell me on Svelte, depending on how it's handled. So how would you update heroes in the list? I think what you're saying, Patrick, is the list of heroes are displayed and then edit them right inside the list. You'd have to put like inputs inside the LI and then use some kind of an event if you wanted to capture that and then update the list. And the reason I say event is I probably wouldn't want to bind directly to what came out of the data. I probably want to have a copy. That way I could have like a cancel and save button as well. If you wanted to edit what was right in the list, you could simply just use a bind : value on that list. One other question I've got here, and this is a great one to end on, from Baset Tolga. Thanks for your question. If you're not familiar with other frameworks, if you didn't select Vue, React, or Angular, for example, on our poll, would Svelte be a good choice to start now? I think absolutely. One of the great things about Svelte is, and I showed this to a good friend of mine, Craig, the other day. Craig was working on a project. He's familiar with React and Angular and Vue, and he wanted to try Svelte out. And he got started with it. And when he was done, he made the comment to me of, wow, I wish I had learned Svelte first because I feel like I would have saved so much time from building these other applications. Now, it's an opinion, right? It's opinionated. I've got my opinion, so does he. I think getting started with something, I feel like Svelte is probably the simplest at this point, which is really cool because I think Vue is very simple as well. but Svelte has some really nice features that really kind of slipstream you into getting moving. Now, I do feel like the REPL in Svelte is amazing and easy to teach and learn. And I think the Vue docs are probably the best docs that are out there. If you want a guided framework that tells you basically in a very opinionated way everything you should be doing and the way to do it, which is nice because then you can make less mistakes, but isn't as nice because you have less detours that maybe you want to change things, Angular is a great choice for that. In Svelte, I personally feel like it feels more like React than the other frameworks, which is interesting because React is not my favorite of the four that we mentioned, but Svelte is really amazing to me. So it feels like React, but better in some ways. Just my opinion. I'll do one more question from Kareem. Can I have my API backend code within the same project? You recommend splitting backend and front end in different projects? Yes, honestly, I always do recommend having your API in a different project, like serverless functions or Express or ASP.NET MVC with an API. I like to deploy my functional code from APIs in one project and then my front end in another. One of the biggest reasons among many is that way I can take my front end project and I can deploy it to a CDN and put it all up there in a great place. All right, I lied. We'll do one more question. Is there a Slack, Git, or Discord for Svelte? Yes. If you go to the Svelte homepage at svelte.dev, I'll go there real quick myself to make sure it's up there. There should be a link on here for something called Svelte Society. I'm not seeing it right quick, but it is a link there, and I will make sure I get this up into the chat real quick. Svelte Society is what you look for. That's the name of the Twitter link, and then also the Discord channel is linked there. Okay, I've got the chat. I'll go ahead and put that in here by typing in an answer and sending it. Boom. I think that is it, Daniel, for the questions.
Awesome. So thank you so much, John. It was great to see so many of those questions get answered. I was like, I don't know, that's quite a few, but you got through all of them. So that's great. I just wanted to touch on a few other housekeeping items real quick before we close out today. Number one, if you are interested in signing up for email reminders for upcoming Pluralsight webinars, maybe another one with John Papa here in the future, I'm going to drop a link into the chat, and it's just pluralsight.watch. We kind of set that up there. You can go there if you want to enter your email, and then we'll send you some email reminders, let you know what's on the horizon. One other thing, I said this at the beginning as well, but if you are joining us via Zoom, you'll get an email in the next day or two. We're going to include a link to the recorded version, and we're also going to include some of the resources and links that John has referenced today. So you can, rewatch some of this, share it with a colleague, etc. But with that, John, I just wanted to give you the chance to maybe leave a final takeaway with everyone joining us before we hop off.
I will, and I'm going to share my screen real quick so I can bring up these slides. I promised to show those links one more time. So let's do that as I say it. I want to thank everybody for coming here. First of all, I really appreciate you joining us today. And if you're wondering, with all these web frameworks these days, what should you choose? Svelte, Vue, React, Angular, something else? Honestly, don't listen to me. Don't listen to anybody on this but yourself. Use the one that you feel best using. They're all great options these days. As long as you can fulfill your needs for your business and you can find a job using one of these, I really think they're all good choices. If you're looking for what I feel is the smoothest and easiest to slide into, these days, I would say that is Svelte. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming again, and I hope you have a great rest of your 2020.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.